Right, so this is where we ended up with this drum recording. Cool, you get the idea. Big, fat, impactful rock drums. The idea of this was to try and capture the sorts of sounds that were being used on Taking Back Sunday's Louder Now record, or on their self-titled album, or the sorts of things that Good Charlotte were doing. So it's good fun. What you've just heard is a result of obviously the original drums on input. All of those drums went through like a 1084 preamp emulation and a little bit of EQ, mostly just sort of brightening stuff to make it easier for Robin to hear what he was doing on the day. A lot of those EQ settings were kept. I then went through and assessed the phase of everything, made sure everything was completely in phase, used things like filters and all pass, like low and high pass filters and band pass filters to ensure that everything was as in phase as it could get. No auto align, all of this was done by ear. I then finished the comp and ensured that all the editing was sorted, make sure that the starts and stops were all done. We then cut out the toms, which you can see here, and then what you're hearing now is the result of a little bit of like gating, EQing, some distortion. You can see there's a lot of Saturn going on. Everything is going through like a distressor emulation. If I hit play, you'll see just how hard this thing's being hit. Let's go for the second half of the pre-chorus. Yeah, so this is basically the primary compressor that will be used on the drums. A little bit of high pass filtering, got the this frequency band selected for making sure that the snare is compressing a nice amount. The idea is to get about 12-14 decibels of compression on like the biggest snare drum hits. I might on the final mix I might even end up with even more compression than that. So some of the individual elements, overheads. So, they've clearly been, a lot of the clunky low end has been filtered away. We have our primary kick mic. A little bit of popping and clicking there as my laptop figures out what's going on. That is just a Fet47 copy on the outside of the kick drum. We have a front of kick mic. This is on the opposite end of the room. So if you've seen the video footage of where we were recording, basically where I was sat, down to my right up against the wall was another Fet47 copy. I pointed out the drum kit. We put blankets up in front of the cymbals to try and prevent a lot of the noise, like harsh like cymbal noise getting into that mic. Ultimately it sort of worked, but there was still too much snare drum coming through and it felt weird cutting out the snare drum in that mic. So all I've done is filter it down so it's just low end for the kick drum. And those do add up like this. Yeah, nice satisfying low end sound. Now the attack part of the kick drum isn't actually coming from that Fet47 mic. Instead I have another like 47 clone. It's a SE Electronics like vocal mic. What we've done is place that underneath the snare drum, pointed at the kick beater. So a kick / snare mic basically. And what I've done is I've duplicated it. So I've got one specifically for the kick, one specifically for the snare. The reason for that is the crossover point in my like distortion plugin that I'm using here, Saturn, that crossover point still needs to be used. And so I obviously can't optimize that crossover point for the kick and snare drum on one copy of that mic, because that crossover is going to be different, and so you'll get some weird phasing problems. So the kick version is this. So lots and lots of attack. I'm using distortion to like splay that out and make it like impact more as, you know, less of like a click and more of like a splat. So our kick elements together. It's pretty cool. That's a nice kick. Snare top, good old 57. Now, that is not what a 57 normally sounds like. There's some, you know, there's this EQ. The EQ that was on the like 1084 emulation plugin was a lot more violent, adding tons of high end, probably adding some like 1K as well. I'm just taming the body of the snare a little bit because we're going to get some more of that from our copy of the Kicktrash snare mic and a few other sources like the room mics, but adding some more mid-range regression in. And then the distortion is like doing the lion's share of the work. So I basically have these two bands turned all the way up on the warm tape setting, turning them down a little bit to bring them a little bit more in balance. But without this, that's not a bad snare sound, but it isn't that, which I think is a lot more fun. Kicktrash snare being duplicated here for the snare drum. So you can hear that's a lot more of the kind of like boxiness, trying to get some of that weight through for the snare drum. So the two of those together, it just makes it sound like, you know, it doesn't sound like two drums. It sounds like one drum that's being hit really hard. And to be fair, that drum was being hit really hard. Smash mic. Not really sure what I'm going to do with this one. We had a spare input, so we thought we'd just put another one up. This is a like cheap ribbon mic, sort of underneath where the ride is, like pointing at the kick and snare drum. So I've got it gated so that it'll open for the snare and the toms. And so it's adding some impact to those things, but being mono, it might end up being that it sounds better without the toms in there, and having the toms splayed out might be better. It might end up being that it being mono helps to kind of ground the drum kit a little bit and give something in the middle, so that when those tom hits happen, it sounds like it's happening like from a place instead of just as like a point of audio hanging around your head. Room mics. So this is our mono room, so you can see this in the video of us setting up. This is a Warm Audio 47 Junior pointed at the wall in the corner behind Robin. So on one side it's got the plasterboard wall, and on the other side it's got the curtain. So it's getting one early reflection off of the kit, not two, because obviously the curtain's not going to reflect. Again, this has been filtered down. I've stuck a compressor on it to blow it up a little bit. Ultimately, this will probably be gated to just open on the snare. And what it will do is basically try and legitimize the distortion that's on the snare. So at the moment, the distortion on the snare sounds a little bit out of place. By adding this room mic, it will all that distortion will suddenly fall into place, and so it will be there to help provide more body to the impact of these drums, but also it will fight through the mix without sounding strange, like somebody's just bunged a whole load of distortion on stuff. You know, we're trying to go for a drum kit that sounds massive, that doesn't sound fake. You know, we're not trying to make these sound like sample drums. Toms, we spent a long time. Well, I say we spent a long time. Robin spent some time tuning these up. So these are in the key of the song. All the drums are in the key of the song. The primary drum being used is this low tom. That's nice. We dressed these with some lovely dust cloths and painter's tape. to get the decay down, but that's great. Again, I've filtered out a bunch of mid-range, so just getting rid of all this like low mid-range stuff like that. No, that isn't helping your tom sound at all. This is going to take up too much room, and on these big tom heavy like patterns like this, you know, it's taking up way too much space. High tom, very similar thing. So again, it sounds ridiculous, you know, getting something that heavily, even going so far as to edit out a bunch of other stuff. You know, I've edited it and put a gate on it because I just like the way that the gate sounds, having it sort of like ramp into the sound. But if you take it out, you know, it adds a lot to, you know, the sort of weight of that tom hit. And makes those moments feel a little bit more special, without sounding like they just exist in their own little world. Rooms. So we set the drums up on a stage in the village hall that's near me, and that meant we were getting a lot of resonance off of the underside of the stage, so the kick drum was sort of being supported in that way. We were getting a lot of resonance in the sort of space that we were in, despite the fact that one whole wall was basically a giant theatre curtain. But it meant that room mics weren't really going to exist in the same space. So outside of the main hall, so outside of basically the stage, outside of that big long wall that the curtain is on, we just placed some pencil condensers that are just pointing out like this into the room. And that's, if we play another example, that's this. So again, I have filtered out all the clunky low end. You know, if you bring all that stuff back in, or a lot of that stuff back in, it's just taking up too much space. All of that impact is supposed to be coming from our close mics, and from our like closer room mics. So it kind of, you know, it doesn't need that. So yeah, that's a rundown of all the different kit pieces. We saw this. Let's see what happens when we turn it off. Yeah, okay. That's doing a lot. A little bit of EQ. So there's a little bit of low end support going on. This is just to make it feel good for like recording other stuff on top. And this is to add some more weight to the snare. So you can see like, you know, just helping to add more body. The compressor is going to be clamping down so much on all aspects of the drum kit when you're compressing by 12, 14 decibels on some of the snare hits. You really need to make some of that weight up after the fact. And what that does is it allows you to keep all that like punch and impact from the actual snare being hit without too much low end going into that compressor, and then make up the low end afterwards. So you're you know, you've got very distorted, lots of high end impact into a compressor. The compressor is helping to like tame some of the impact, and because of the slow attack on the compressor, it's adding more of the sort of right after the impact, like to give you more punch to your actual hits. And then after that, you're left with something that's a little bit too anemic, and so you add a little bit more weight on the outside, which makes a big difference. And the last thing is, you know, when you're using like distortion on individual mics, something that works really well is adding some overall distortion. And the overall distortion that I really like to use is like tape distortion. Tape machines distort more aggressively the higher up into the frequency range you go, and so that means this is perfectly suited for largely leaving the low end that you've just sculpted alone, although you'll get like head bumps, and you know, if you're lowering the tape speed, you'll get a little bit more low end and stuff like that. You can EQ those things out using like the various settings, but you're largely leaving the low end alone. It's certainly not getting distorted anywhere near as much. But the further up the frequency range you go, and you start getting into like the impact of the snare drum and the like transients in the cymbals, and then the real sort of like noise in the cymbals, especially when Robin is really hitting a he's just really hitting that right crash for the whole chorus. And there are some other hits, some really cool stuff in the like break of this song, where Robin is hitting like accents on the snare and the cymbals at the same time, and so you'd like those to be like really dynamic, but you don't want them to be harsh. So yeah, lovely. Helps to just smooth those things over. So yeah, that's what's going on. I did experiment with a parallel thing. So if we listen to that same section, I will unmute the parallel. Before I did all of this other work to this drum kit, the parallel was great because it was doing a lot of the heavy lifting for me. I mean, on its own, it's a very like drum crush kind of sound. Yeah, so there's like some, the impacts are getting crushed and some of the like ambience is coming up. The problem is, after adding all of this distortion and like addressing the way that things impact and making them feel satisfying, stuff like that, this parallel feed is just, it's making it sound more like I've opened up a a drum library and started playing some samples, and that's not what we want. Or for me, I want the actual drum performance to shine through. It would be such a shame to replace any of this performance with samples or have anybody think it's samples. We're not going for that like Queens of the Stone Age, like uber consistent, this must be a drum machine kind of thing. This is an amazing performance by a drummer in an actual space, and it's a space that you can't get that space in a plugin. There is no like local town hall plug-in reverb or anything like that. Even if you could have that, like the impact that space has on your overheads and like your room mics and all those various like timing delays, that gives you that sense of space. Maintaining as much of that as possible is super important. And so while this drum performance has been like comped and edited, and some of it has been like adjusted in terms of like feeling and stuff like that, it really is somebody playing a drum kit in a room and trying to maintain as much of that aspect as we can, while still giving it the ability to fight through a whole bunch of guitars, lots of distorted guitars, big loud vocals, stuff like that. And yeah, I think Robin obviously did an incredible job of playing on this, and I've really enjoyed getting this reference drum mix to the point that it's at, and we're ready to do things like record guitars.